Seeley, who I introduced yesterday, who's faculty lead in social science and research ethics at Arr-Nar and also professor of social anthropology and health at London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. So let me just share your slides, Busi. It's all yours. Just nudge me. Lucy, are you muted?
I'm sorry. So good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks for the introduction, Maureen. I was explaining that my internet is unstable, so I switched my video off. And so yesterday, colleagues touched on the challenges and difficulties regarding the scope of researchers' obligations to respond to the participants living with complex social, economic, and health needs. So today, the title of my presentation is Managing Ancillary Care in Resource-Constrained Settings, Dilemmas Faced by Frontline HIV Prevention Researchers in a Rural Area in South Africa. So this is one of the findings from REACH South Africa. As Maureen pointed out, I will share the context and some of the key themes, and Janet is going to share the conclusion and the reflections. Next slide, please. So to provide context for the colleagues who were not able to attend yesterday, I will quickly go through the broader REACH aims and objectives. So one is to understand the dilemmas arising post-approval in studies involving vulnerable populations, how to better support research teams in responding to complex and structural needs encountered in research in low and middle income countries, and to consider the implications for research ethics guidance on vulnerability in research encounter. So in South Africa, the REACH study was linked to the impact evaluation of the DREAMS intervention study. The intervention project in which our case study was embedded was developed to target multiple social, behavioral, and biological vulnerabilities to HIV amongst adolescent girls and young women. So our colleagues sought to evaluate a comprehensive package of the interventions that was provided by 11 partners in Umkhanyakude district. The core services included biomedical, behavioral, and structural interventions. And these included HIV testing and counseling, post-violence care for survivors of gender-based violence, school-based interventions, condom promotion, and parental programs, among others. So sorry, just to quickly acknowledge the team from the link study, which was led by Mariam, Natsai, and Tembelihle. Thank you. Next slide. So by way of providing context, we identified some of the issues in the literature regarding ancillary care. And we found that existing ancillary care guidance fails to fit in the low and middle income countries' research context. And this void has potentially shifted decisions around ancillary care provision to frontline researchers. So, and then we also identified that early models of ancillary care emerged from high income country settings. And so the focus has been on clinical care and the tendency to overlook other types of needs. So a common strategy for addressing healthcare needs is to plan for referrals to care and services within the hospitals or health system where the research occurs. Thank you. So the specific objective for this presentation is to describe the gaps in managing ancillary care in context of health and social needs. We specifically describe how the research staff and HIV implementing partners responded to these needs. Thank you. So I'll quickly go through the methods. Thanks. As pointed out, the intervention or study was conducted in Umkhanyakude district, which is in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. And just to point out that R is located here near Mtuba town. So the socioeconomic and political context, the majority of the households derive their livelihoods from subsistence agriculture, mining, and social grants. The social determinants of health include unemployment and lack of basic services. For example, only 22% of the households have access to potable water and 34% have access to electricity. So many of the community members and families use biomedical and traditional health systems concurrently. Like other rural settings in South Africa, there is a strong presence of tribal and traditional structures, and human rights are determined by statutory and customary laws. In terms of the disease burden, HIV prevalence was estimated at 30%, and there are high rates of teenage pregnancies and non-communicable diseases in adults. Thank you. So I'll quickly go through the recruitment of our participants. So we used qualitative research methods, and our participants were categorized into 3 groups. The first groups were the participants from the intervention linked study, and they provided their experiences regarding the DREAMS intervention project. And these included adolescent girls and young women stratified by age, their caregivers, implementing partners, frontline researchers, and senior researchers. And we use a diverse data collection techniques based on the research questions or aim. And then the second group involved ethics committee members, public engagement officers, and the community advisory boards, and they provided perspectives on research among vulnerable populations and the ethical dilemmas. And then the last group were the community members and stakeholders, and they provided information or their views on the socio-cultural context and the research and the impact of research in this setting. So in total, we recruited 77 participants, and the interviews were audio taped, and they were conducted in the local language, isiZulu and or English, depending on the participants' preference. Thank you. So in terms of the analysis, the team met regularly to reflect on the data and emerging themes. We used the open manual iterative coding process during and after the data collection. We used thematic framework analysis to determine our themes, and the themes were determined by the study aims and the contents of the interview guide, as well as the inductive development of codes as they emerge from the data. Thank you. So I will quickly go through the findings, and we identified 4 themes. The first theme relates to meeting the participants' needs in and through research. So some of this was identified yesterday. We found that the participants' needs were structural and beyond the remit of research. So research was seen as a source of care and expected to address wider health and social needs. And this is reflected in the quotes during the focus group discussion, with the public engagement officers. The community expects us to respond to their needs, and we cannot do that. The community needs a lot. They need water, they need housing, roads, education for their children. They need grants, and they expect this from us. Thank you. The second theme we identified was that referral services for gender-based violence and child sexual abuse were limited in terms of the level of reach and support. So the provision of gender-based violence referral through research was an important attempt to at least partly respond to the adolescent girls and young women's vulnerabilities during the research encounter. However, this was beset with challenges and unintended consequences. These included issues around access. For example, the post-violence care centers were limited to health facilities that were collaborating with the intervention program. So access to these centers depended on proximity to those facilities. So this meant that some of the participants either had to walk long distances or spend some money on transportation to access these services, or they did not because they could not afford to either walk or transportation costs. This was also constrained by the quality of services with regards to the number of the personnel and the type of expertise required to address these gender-based violence cases. And as a result, there was also a lack of trust in the services. So one of the examples is that this compromised the dignity and privacy of the participants. And this was illustrated during an in-depth interview with one of the implementing partners. The guidelines say if you have been raped, make sure that you get into clinic or you go to the law enforcement within 72 hours. Then when they get there, they become uncomfortable waiting in the queues, and everyone is looking at them saying, maybe she has been raped. And then the frontline researchers expressed anxiety and uncertainty in terms of following or implementing the ethical guidelines or standard operating procedures. This is illustrated here. The guidelines state you might be required to go to testify in court in the event the case may be taken to court. We also live in the same communities. So if I go and testify against a family member in a child's rape case, for instance, am I still going to be able to go back and be accepted in that community? This was further complicated by the dual authority of the traditional and legal systems. For example, the local practice requires reporting cases of abuse to traditional local leaders, and the matter is arbitrated between the perpetrators and the victims' families, often without consideration of the law. So the frontline researchers tended to refer teenagers to health facilities for pregnancy screening and or HIV testing rather than pursue mandatory reporting. Thank you. And then the third theme we identified was how researchers responded to participants' unmet needs. And just to point out that there is guidance and guidelines in place to refer to government institutions and other organizations to facilitate access to services identified during the research encounter. However, these institutions were often overwhelmed and faced huge backlogs, so they were not responsive to the participants' needs as they should. So this meant that the researchers and public engagement officers often provided a critical source of support. And so they expressed feelings of being overwhelmed, emotional distress, and helplessness. And this is illustrated in the following quotes. People share their stories and you wonder, where do I even begin to help them? What makes it unbearable is the inability to go an extra mile to help them. It makes you emotional. And then one of the senior investigators stated, those things leave me a bit helpless and wish I could do more. When the staff come back from the field and narrate all these sad stories. Thank you. And then the last theme that you identified was lessons for responding to structural care needs within research. Again, as it was pointed yesterday, we found that there was a mismatch between communities' expectations and the research institutions' remit for research and support. And the responsibility to respond to ancillary care needs was borne by frontline staff, and this theme was very strong. And we also found that the frontline staff were often ill-equipped to address the participants' needs. To the extent that they were a source of support, as I noted in the previous slide, they often felt inadequate. And this is illustrated here. The community looks at us as people who are interested in them only when we want what we want. There's nothing we bring back to people, excuse me, as a form of support. So thank you. I will hand over to Janet to do the conclusion and reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Busi. I get the easy bit, so that's nice. So I mean, I think we all are very aware, and Busi has illustrated it, that research is seen, as we say here, as a source of help and response to the needs beyond narrow research objectives. And I think there is a disconnect often between what the funder is going to be sympathetic to as being a need and a source that we could give of help and support that doesn't gel with the feelings of the staff who are actually implementing the project. And I think that is something that we are very sensitive to and need to be more sensitive to. And I think that the thing that really strikes us is the protocols and proposals that talk about referring people to services, referring people to standard of care, when that actually really doesn't exist. And it's not that one can necessarily provide that service, but one needs to be very aware and supportive of the staff over what the limits of that referral are. And there is a lot of frustration when you refer somebody to a service where they know and their family knows and others know that that really isn't going to help, that the queue is very long and the referral service simply can't meet that need. So it does put, as we've said, the frontline research staff in a position of feeling that they want to do something. And what we've found in ARI is the need to actually provide support to staff who are very distressed by what they find and their feelings of inadequacy, because of course they're completely in the front line when it comes to people being dissatisfied with what the researchers in ARI are providing. Next slide, please, Maureen. So I think it's a dilemma, you know, how do we better support frontline researchers to manage the situations we put people in? I think firstly, we want to raise awareness that this is real, that often frontline researchers bottle up the pain that they feel, the frustration they feel. So finding as I know colleagues are doing in various places, for people to be able to get support to talk about what they're seeing, and certainly in ARI providing counselling and somebody to talk to has become a very important part of managing the situation. And so, as Busi has been pointing out, and we feel very strongly, the emotions, the moral emotions in research ethics is an important area for us to reflect on and think how to respond better to. Next slide, please. And it's very odd, I'm thanking myself, but never mind. So these are the people we're grateful for. And as Lucy said, Mariam, Sharmanesh and the Dreams team were extremely supportive of this work. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Busi and Janet, for a really powerful presentation. And I hope I was busy with the slides. I hope people will put their questions in the chat. And we're going to do 2 talks and then come around to questions. So if you have comments and questions for Busi and Janet, please put those in the chat or say I have a question and we'll come back around to that. I'm going to turn it over to Paik Young to introduce the next talk.
Right, thank you, Maureen. So my name is Paik Young. I'm based in Thailand and I'm the Thailand country PI for the REACH study here. So the next talk will be a double act. The first speaker will be Supaat Asarat, glamorously known as ICE. So you may know him already. ICE is a social scientist and public engagement coordinator at Moru. And this will be followed by Napat, who's a social scientist and lead interviewer of the Mesot case study. Napat is Thai Karen, grew up in Mesot, where our study is located. For the Q&A session, we have them both, but we also have Supaat Nostan, who is also part of our team and the team photographer. She's also very glamorous. I mean, everyone is glamorous. And then we have also the very glamorous Rose McGreedy. I think she's on the call today. So for the Q&A, we have the team here. So this talk is about the notion of Arr-Nar or Kreng-jai and how it affects fairness, voluntariness, and vulnerability in research. What is Arr-Nar or Kreng-jai? No spoilers from me. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Ice and Napat. I think Ice is starting first, so please go ahead, Ice.
Hello, everyone. Hello, I am Supaat Asarat or ICE. Thank you, and thank you, Paik Young. I am here with my colleague Napat and Supaat from REACH Thailand team. We would like to continue on from the presentation yesterday, which has focused on the nature of vulnerability, agency, and ethical dilemmas in research. So this session, we will discuss why it is important to place research ethics in cultural context, then discuss the complex cultural idea and moral value of Arr-Nar in Burmese or Kreng-jai in Thai, and how this idea informs core ethical principles in research ethics practice. So the photos in the presentation is from Supaat, and the drawings are product from the participatory visual method with CAB members and frontline healthcare workers. So to quickly recap, for those who may not have heard from the talk from our colleagues yesterday, REACH and Mesot aim to understand research ethics principle in a low-resource, politically complex border region, focusing on migrants' direct experiences of vulnerability and agency in daily living and through the research encounter. So Mesot is a border town located on the Thai-Myanmar border. It is also a special economic zone, a gateway of an east-west economic corridor, the main border crossing point and destination for economic migrants. Most migrants are employed in agricultural sector, in construction sector, in clothing industries, and they are also daily wage workers or casual laborers, which means that they don't have regular income and are underpaid. Disease burdens includes infectious diseases, malnutrition, anemia, malaria, TB, and other seasonal diseases. Let's get to know the site more. These are the key features of SMRU, the integration of research and health services. So SMRU has a strong commitment to migrant health. They provide essential health services to underserved, marginalized populations along the Thai-Myanmar border area, addressing endemic diseases through surveillance, treatment, and research to inform interventions for migrants. Also, it is recognized as a humanitarian organization, providing place for safe childbirth, TB, malaria prevention and treatment, and services such as health insurance scheme for the migrants at the border clinics and its networks clinics. We interviewed participants from 2 linked clinical studies who were pregnant at the time they participated in these linked studies. These women first came to SMRU clinics for antenatal care, and they found out that they got malaria or hepatitis B and were invited to join one of the linked studies. Now, we will turn to our analysis of findings related to deeply ingrained moral cultural norms that challenged some of the dominant ways of thinking in research ethics. But before we discuss how and where Arr-Nar or Kreng-jai manifests in the research context, it is helpful to understand the meaning of Arr-Nar or Kreng-jai. From this point onward, we will refer to only the Burmese Arr-Nar, as it shared the same meaning in Thai as reflected in the data as well. So what is Arr-Nar? Arr-Nar is a concept embedded in daily life as a moral value, upheld by people living in this region regardless of their educational background or social status. It is the way of life for which people depend on each other, whether they are blood related or not. This moral value is taught to children at home, at schools, and reflect one's nobility and graciousness when upholding this moral value. Take a look at some example here. Respect and deference, it's the reluctance to assert or give instruction to superiors. It's compliance with authority. Generosity, gratitude, and reciprocity, it's giving back. It's being generous to others. It's the thoughtfulness and mindfulness. Humility and graciousness, it's being cautious and reserved, being modest and humble. And to grasp more on the positive norms and norms of concerns embedded in Arr-Nar, here our team has created a visual to help convey these various meanings of this rich concept, which is not easily captured in English moral terms. You can see the range of moral concepts captured in this very complex norm, where meanings and one's obligations may depend on the social context and relational features of situations. In the team, we call this circle the circle of life. So why is this concept so important to understand in research ethics? For this context, we have a trusted institution that has been here for more than 30 years, SMRU, a trusted institution by the women, by the migrant population, has been providing health-related services along the border here, as well as conducting research aimed at improving health for the communities and marginalized groups. At SMRU, the frontline clinical and research staff they came from the local communities and speak the same language and share the same beliefs of Arr-Nar. Our analysis here explored how this rich concept of Arr-Nar deeply shapes the social moral relationship between researchers and participants and research institution and community. Let's now consider how Arr-Nar influenced key encounters between participants and researchers in our study. This figure shows how Arr-Nar arose in the key interactions between researchers and participants throughout the research pathway, again underscoring the importance of relational obligations and feelings that affect each of these important encounters. The yellow boxes demonstrate the points where different feelings of Arr-Nar arise. The pathway goes in a loop from point of contact to post-research, and due to word of mouth to peers, to friends back at home, to family members, about services provided at the clinics. It goes back to the point of contact again. To illustrate, take a look at the word of mouth to point of contact. If a participant has a positive experience and receive benefit and services, the Arr-Nar feelings may include trusting the research and other researchers, being grateful and appreciative. Such a person may go back to the community, to the family members, and share the feelings. The next time someone in the family or in the community asks to participate, they may be feelings of respect, humility, deference, and gratitude shown to the researchers out of these relational ties and trust between people. Now, I would like to hand over to my colleague to continue on with our analysis of finding. Over to you, Pinapat.
Thank you, Ice. So how did Arr-Nar potentially influence reasons for participating? And what are the reasons for these participants to participate in research? Let's have a look. While patients and participants recognize the dedication of frontline health workers and doctors that are doing research in parallel with providing care to them, they also perceive or anticipate health benefits if they participated in research as ways to access care. Another main reason for choosing to participate in research is to protect their unborn children. They put forth the safety and well-being of their children before their own. Let's consider this quote. I wanted to be cured, and also no damage to my baby, because for our health, they give free treatment, and for that I accepted or consented. It is important to know that patients and participants understand that they have a choice to not participate in research while still receive care and treatment at this institute. Next, please. As mentioned earlier, that SMRU has been conducting research and providing care alongside at its clinics in this area for more than 30 years. Many participants felt honor towards the institute and staff for health benefits they have gained over the years. Participants do not perceive any harm in taking part in research because staff providing care and carrying out research are the same staff at the same institute. Additionally, reciprocity and gratitude are not only demonstrated by research participants. Frontline health workers, researchers also express their gratitude towards participants' commitment throughout the study. They act by giving quality care, making themselves available whenever needed, and pay attention to participants. And these are ways frontline health workers and researchers or doctors reciprocate and express their appreciation toward research participants. Let's consider these quotes from participants. They pay attention and give care, so I try to come for study. Sometimes I feel like I was healed because they speak to me nicely. Next slide, please. Then there is the sense of being selfless and acting for the greater good, which is also part of being Arr-Nar. Many participants expressed that they decided to take part in study to benefit others. They feel that the study, the two-link study, or even REACH will not only benefit them, but also other women in different areas in the future, as described here. It's what they wanted to know, researchers will get to know. They will know about this disease and they can look at it and how we got it, and they can help others also. I am interested. If I tell researchers, others will also get help. How am I and how I feel? If I tell them it is also good for others, then we probed. What if you don't get any benefit? Her response, it doesn't matter. Next, please. Research participants understand the regularity and importance to return for follow-ups when they decided to join the study. They always try to come back for appointments, even if it could mean being absent from work, losing a day of income, and having to wake up extra early and spend hours traveling and reach the clinic. These challenges or seasonal challenges, such as flooded roads, do not undermine their commitment to what study they have joined. And by showing up for their appointments, it is how they express their moral values of Arr-Nar toward researchers and frontline health workers who are waiting for them at each appointment. Let's consider this quote from the focus group discussion. I always come back for follow-ups. I was never absent from study. We just leave our work and come. I don't think of anything. I get on the truck with umbrella in the rain and come to the clinic. I try to come, whatever it is for, I try to come. As the appointment was made, I try to come and reach the clinic. I have not absent. Next, please. The spirit of Arr-Nar comes across in observing or hearing about the difficult journeys made by participants and patients out of a sense of responsibility to make an appointment. Sometimes they will not speak of it or bring attention to any hardship. So how does Arr-Nar manifest in recruitment to research? How much do participants understand? In light of norms of Arr-Nar, is their participation voluntary? Let's have a look. Most participants in this area are illiterate, and it raises concerns about their understanding in research. The participants' information sheet and consent form are usually 4 to 5 pages long when translated. And even with verbal explanation, some of the terminologies are scientific and technical and not familiar to them. This raises ethical question whether participants fully understand in a context where Arr-Nar where asking questions might seem as rude or might take up time of a respected person such as researchers, and will they tell us if they don't understand? Let's consider these quotes from our researchers. Even we invest heavily, we realize that the patient don't understand completely. We repeat again and again and again, they will understand the word that you explain, but don't understand all the impact and all the benefit. When participants are feeling Arr-Nar to what researchers and frontline health workers, can they really say no when they are approached to join studies? And how easy or difficult for them to make such decisions? And if they are to refuse, how does it look like in the culture of Arr-Nar? In this instance, this participant was approached by staff asking if she would be interested to join another study. She was overwhelmed by the amount of medicine she would have to take, and instead of directly refusing, she used an excuse to not join the study. She said, "I told a lie. I will go back to Myanmar. I will go back and I will not take medicines or join the study anymore." This kind of refusal is to avoid upsetting others, which in this case, study staff, who is also a health worker. Our collected data demonstrated that women who took part in linked studies or enriched study did exercise their agency. They made their own decisions after receiving study information, and with the feeling of Arr-Nar, their decision to take part in study was mainly influenced by foreseeable benefits such as extra visitations and time with doctor, opportunity to gain knowledge, and compensation. And what are the issues around this? Issues and concern of researchers and frontline health workers. When participants are being Arr-Nar and not expressing their needs or concerns or challenges, these burdens are hidden and cannot properly address. As part of being Arr-Nar also means not creating concern and being hesitant to ask for help, as this may cause trouble to others. These burdens may go unnoticed. But from the quotes, researchers totally understand that to reach a clinic, it's already a challenge. They lose a day of wages and it's a huge financial loss. And they also risk of being caught by the police. What do this all mean to us? At this site, clinical services and humanitarian assistance has been offered alongside research to respond to vulnerabilities in the migrant community. The majority of migrants living in this area are undocumented and do not have access to basic health care and struggle to pay for treatment when they need it. For this very reason, SMRU tries to address this gap by providing care and give back to the community and attempts to reduce this structural gap. While research is funded and humanitarian services are not, researchers who are also doctors often face with difficult clinical decisions and feel distressed if research is a burden on migrants or doesn't provide direct benefits. And does this institutional commitment to give back to the community and those most in need create challenges for voluntary research participation in a culture where gratitude runs deep? Let's consider this quote from a frontline health worker. She said, "We also empathize for them. I am here, they always come here, and I'm always look after them. We have to help them, they also help us, and that's what I tell them." We found that within Arr-Nar, there is a role for quiet, graceful agency. People seek trusted, beneficial care, contribute to research they view as important or beneficial, and refuse in less obvious ways, but they do refuse. Does gratitude or indebtedness interfere with meaningful informed consent if consent includes a deep desire to return a favor? Researchers should be aware of Arr-Nar in order to ensure voluntary consent and signs of understanding or not understanding, which might not be overt or direct. These lessons underscore the importance of situating research ethics in cultural social context to ensure meaningful practice. We thank our participants, women, mothers, sisters, and men and their family members taking part in our studies. They have gone through difficult and challenging experiences, and we admire them for openly discuss and share such inspiring stories with our study team. We thank our team for their dedication and commitment to ensure that voices of our participants are presented. We thank Wellcome Trust, MRC, and Newton Fund for supporting our studies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Napat and Ice. That was fantastic. Thank you to the whole team, Supak. So we have a half hour now since they were so speedy. We have half hour for questions and discussion for either Busi and Janet or Napat and Ice. And I have quite a long list of terrific questions. So I thought I would just go ahead and dive into what you all have asked, but please feel free to raise your hand if you want to jump in on that particular point. Going back to this is a lot of these cross both talks, but this one was raised during Busi and Janet's presentation. Catherine Wright from Nuffield Council asked about the moral emotions and asked whether we need to find ways of reflecting or accounting for the moral emotions in research ethics guidance. So I wonder if maybe Busi, we could start with you. That was such a strong theme throughout your data on the moral emotions of the frontline staff that you were hearing. I wonder if you have any reflections on how we could do a better job of capturing the moral emotions at the research ethics guidance level. Catherine, did I get that right? Please feel free to unmute if you want to elaborate.
Absolutely, thank you very much. It was a fabulous presentation, thank you very much. And it really struck me with some of the themes that we found in the Nuffield Council's latest work on research in emergencies as well. And how I think a lot of our guidance has this sort of fantasy of both participants and researchers as being autonomous, very calm, very rational individuals. And obviously we all are at times and we're not at others. And just how our guidance and how our procedures, which are meant to protect and support ethical research, how they could account better for the messiness of emotions that are an inevitable part of research, and particularly in difficult settings like this. I thought there were fabulous findings really illustrating that, and I'd love to hear any thoughts on how we could do it better at a guidance level. Thank you.
Busi, you'd like to take that on?
Thank you for the question. Although I'm not too sure if I got it, but I'll try to respond and then you can indicate if I responded to the question. So one of the issues that we found during the interviews with the frontline staff is letting them to be honest, and they also spoke about the flexibility. For example, the issue of not pursuing mandatory reports was, so it was for their safety. And I'm sorry, I used the wrong example. So one of the issues that they identified was the pressure to reach the targets in terms of the interviews. And so they found that there is not adequate space to deal with some of the issues, and even being honest or open or realistic in terms of what is expected of them. So like we were saying, that it's like the agenda is set and you just have, it's like shape up or ship out. So there are time constraints and pressures that are expected. So the question then is so the response then is to use, I think Notando has mentioned it in the chat box, provide support structures, not just for data analysis. And the debrief sessions tend to be superficial in some instances because they come up with these real issues, and the feedback that they get oftentimes does not address what their concerns are. I hope my rambling responded to the question.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Brucey.
Does anybody else want to chip in on the emotional side of research?
Can I? This is Florencia.
Please, Florencia.
I think it's really important what you were pointing out, Catherine. And I think that guidelines normally are much more oriented to the participants, but not to the researchers. And in this kind of research that is so difficult to achieve, with, I don't know, young girls being raped and with HIV and in such difficult situations. I think I don't know if the guidelines are the specific place, but it is something to be considered. I remember also, for example, but I think that maybe having at least one guideline speaking about these needs and how to protect the researchers in the field, it is important. And I was telling, I remember an evaluation I did for the European Commission, and one of the worries was the safety of the researchers, because that was research that was going to take place in countries where there was a lot of political instability and there might be problems there. So I think it is an important issue to be addressed, because we have to care for the participants, but also for the well-being and mental health and physical health of researchers. And I sent a message because when I was preparing my presentations for the IAB seminar we did with REACH, when I was reading and getting involved in the different studies, it was even from a so much more detached place. That was my position, just reading and seeing the slides. I was really moved, and it was difficult to, because I was imagining the situation, so I can really imagine the difficulties of the research team, and sometimes saying, well, I have to refer these, and these people will not only take revenge maybe on me, but on the same victim. So I don't know, it's, I acknowledge it's really, really hard. Sorry for the long talk.
Thank you, Florencia. No, it's really, really helpful to hear your reflections on this. Wendy, did you want to add to this? And then Janet.
Yeah, look, thanks. I think I'm probably on the same page as Florencia. But in Australia, when we've been revising our national research ethics guidelines and trying to look at how we, the capacity to build in some demand or requirement that institutions ensure that their researchers are safe, and depending on the context, what that might involve. So it might be training in moral emotions and how to deal with those when researchers are in very difficult situations. So it's something that's on our radar at the level of national research ethics guidelines in Australia. That part of the research guidelines is under draft at the moment, under revision. So we haven't quite landed yet, but it's certainly something that we've been thinking about, and how, it would have to be kind of quite general guidance at the level of, institutions must, ensure the safety of their staff for one thing, and then researchers must ensure that they have the necessary skills. And sometimes in this kind of situation, it'd be predictable to some extent, the supports that people might need, but then you'll also need structures that can be responsive if things come up in the research that weren't anticipated.
Wendy, would you be able to share any of those draft guidelines? Or are they really draft at this point? It would be great to see an example of how this is being brought in.
Yeah, then I'm not at liberty to show them at the moment. They're under public consultation. Well, I mean, I can show you the draft that's gone to consultation because that was a public document. But I haven't seen the feedback yet, and it sounds like there'll be quite a big revision before it lands.
It'll be really nice to see an example. I'm glad you raised it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try and remember to send that to you, Maureen. If not, give me a nudge.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet.
Yeah, I'll show I'm here. And cold. I mean, I think one of the things is just the challenge of trying to get something like this into guidelines, because the guidelines, you know, certainly for South Africa, you know, the hoops one has to jump through for ethical clearance are, of course, basically to get that form stamped and be given the clearance. It's many of the researchers in RE are not equipped with getting beyond that to the sort of guidance and engagement with moral emotions that we're talking about. And I think that is a really important thing it highlights, because, you know, if you've got a clinical team who want to be in the position to help, they enjoy the privilege, if you like, of being able to help, then it's very hard to say that actually you need some support on something like an emotional issue. And I mean, we have a project with women who have postnatal depression, and there is a counselling team there which is supporting those women, but it's also, I mean, the PI is very sensitive to this, so is aware that the counsellors may need counselling. But it's I think I agree that it would get this more prominent in guidance, but really that most of the guidance that's a little bit fluffy, which we put out, is not really taken on board by the regulatory authorities who want something clear and boxes to tick to be able to do the research. So I think there is engagement ourselves in our institutions with awareness raising and support that it's actually this is important. And I do feel often that social science researchers, if you're working in a mixed disciplinary team, there is an assumption that you really haven't got any problems because you're not dealing with a life-threatening position. You know, you're not, if you like, clinically vulnerable for your skill set. And there is a need to really get some heightened respect for the many challenges that those who are not clinical encounter in their work.
Thank you, Janet. I mean, one of the things that we've been thinking about is we often go quickly to policy and guidance in research ethics, and certainly have historically, and there's such an important role for that, and for clear guidance, and at the same time for guidance that is flexible enough to genuinely guide in these really complex contexts. And I wonder if we're not thinking about complementary mechanisms for ethics support. You know, must it be in guidance? Maybe guidance could create a space for that, and there might be alternative ways of thinking about ethics. We'll engage in that question to some degree in Sassy's presentation after the break. But I wanted to pull together a few questions on the chat, kind of on that theme of, if not in research ethics guidance, what would it look like? What would support look like? So Mike asked what additional vulnerabilities have been created for frontline staff. Wendy asked whether there is a potential mismatch between the funding aims and the lived experiences of the researchers. You know, do we need a change in the infrastructure to make sure that researchers are supported? Rose, Koi, and Natondo all said and asked questions about, to what degree are there debriefs, and where are these happening, and did these happen at any of the sites? So I know I pulled a lot of people's comments together there, but I wonder if we could look at that alternative space. Janet, did you have a new comment, or I see your hand up?
No, I've forgotten to take my hand down.
Okay. I thought I said something outrageous that you disagreed with.
You did, so I'll let you.
Very quickly. So do any of you want to chime in on that? Mike, you had to initially raise the question about what additional vulnerabilities are created for frontline staff. Did you want to elaborate on that? It would be nice to hear people's thoughts.
Well, firstly, I found that discussion really interesting, and so I mean, I don't want to not much to add, but I just wondered whether, I mean, my experience of thinking, particularly in Southeast Asian context, but it must be similar, I imagine, in South Africa. You know, what are there any additional layers of vulnerability, as it were, created by these frontline workers, being also often members of the communities where they're working? So you're going, you know, in addition to the sorts of things we've just discussing, are there other aspects that arise out of their sense of responsibility, or perhaps the sense of responsibility that others see, as it were, in relation to them, other members of the community? So any thoughts on that would be really interesting to hear.
Now, Pat, I'm going to put you on the spot again, because I was just thinking about Arr-Nar when you talked about how it's also felt by the researchers, it's also felt by the frontline staff that they have a responsibility. I was just wondering if you wanted to respond to Mike's question about additional pressures or vulnerabilities that are placed on the shoulders of the frontline researchers, and then I'll go to Busi.
I'm just gonna give you a story that from our frontline colleagues shared with us, where they observed this feeling of Arr-Nar from the participants who would try to come back for research, and they know that the participants try to come back because they feel Arr-Nar toward them. That's why they try to give more care and more time with them. For additional responsibility, I'm going to throw that to Supak. She's here.
Can you repeat the question?
I mean, shall I say what I think again? So I know from, for example, thinking about village malaria workers in Cambodia, just one example, they're often members of the villages where they're also being malaria workers. And so they come under pressure, partly because of their membership, their dual membership of both the public health system in that case, and also being members of the community. And I wonder whether that similar kind of pressure could be on your frontline workers. You know, they're members of the community and they're also playing this other important role.
I don't know whether it's something also to do with the individual, because when we are, I will just talk about my experience. I don't feel any pressure to talk to someone, and I look at their face. I can see when they don't want, then I don't push it. I feel Arr-Nar toward them also. So you have the sensitivity, so they respect that as well.
Just to add a little bit more, our
1 second.
Hi, Francois.
I want to interject in the conversation. I think that in relation to Michael's question is that in the context here there is an additional layer of vulnerability for them. It's that it's not only that they belong to the community, it's also that they belong to organizations of ethnic minorities, armed groups, civilian organizations, and those organizations can exert certain pressure on them to follow certain ways of doing things, so to speak. So sometimes they are taken between various priorities. Like on the one hand, they have to do their work for the research, but on the other hand, they have to do the work for the community. But also they are under the pressure from those groups or those organizations, so to speak. So that can be another additional layer of complexity.
I just want to add a little bit more. Some of our staffs who are also a member of the community, and in the view of patients or villagers or community members where they come from, it's 24 hours that they are healthcare staff. So whatever it's healthcare related, they will come to these people. And from my observations, whether they're staff of SMRU or member of the community, I feel like if you are a respected healthcare personnel and someone, the community members or villagers feel that they can rely on you, they take up that role with such pride. They don't see it as a burden.
Yeah, that I agree with Nakati.
Thank you both. Busi, did you want to comment on this? I saw that you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I meant to comment earlier to respond to Mike's question. So one of the complexities of being frontline workers and living in the same community, as I noted, was the poor feedback loop. So they would refer, or a family or a participant would request a referral, and when they followed up maybe with a particular government institution or organization and they were not getting feedback, so then it was hard for them because they would have to go back to that household for data collection or interact with them. And so it caused distress for them that they did not have the response or the service that the families required. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Busi. Natondo and Koi, I wondered if one or both of you wanted to say a bit from the perspective of frontline researchers. I know you're doing a lot more now, and you played both roles. But what was helpful for you in terms of debriefing? Most of you both mentioned the helpfulness of having a debrief. What did that look like, and what would be helpful from your perspective in working with other frontline researchers? Natondo, are you on?
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Natondo. Sorry to put you on the spot. You had a really nice comment about the importance of debriefing and discussions. I wondered if you could say a bit more about what you found helpful.
So I think what I found less helpful, first of all, Busi has sort of alluded to that. I've observed how the debriefs are really focused on the science and data collection and discussing the data more than putting the researchers or the field workers in the midst of it. And by that, I mean more than really being, I guess, person-centered in caring for our field workers and data collectors. And like Busi said, this leads to them having superficial feedback in terms of how they're doing and how they're coping with things. Whereas I feel in different circumstances or in different settings, debriefs have been almost like, I guess I'll use my own background in psychology, where a therapist needs to have a supervision session because there is an awareness that when you're talking to a person as a psychologist, you're taking on the burdens of that person. So the supervision is really meant to debrief and explore your emotions and how that impacts on the work. And I think something similar with field workers as support is really helpful. I know Camry has done something or discussed at some point something similar. We're really looking into the individual and the emotional impact of what they're experiencing when they go into the field. So it almost feels like, separating the debriefs for data and having the debriefs as a supportive structure is really important, which is something I find quite lacking because of time pressures, because of a lot of the time scientists are really more interested in getting the data and the papers out and writing the next grant than they are about focusing on the ethics of or the moral of looking after the frontline researchers as well.
Thank you very much, Natondo. And sorry to put you on the spot, but it's so helpful to hear your reflections on that. Koi, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything Natondo has said. I hope I pronounced the name correct. But so I've personally always found debrief to be a really crucial part of kind of my data collection. I would rather do less interviews in a day, but have significant and substantial time to debrief with my team. So, and for example, Anderson Charo, who's on this call, helped me with my data collection for my PhD. And we used to spend an entire afternoon not just debriefing about the data that we collected, but even about just the experience of having been in particular people's homesteads, or the level of poverty, or when we had come across children who are highly malnourished, what did that mean? Did we respond correctly? How are we all feeling about that? And I found that to be and I did that as well now that I've moved to Nairobi and I'm doing data collection in kind of urban informal settlements where there's high poverty, domestic violence, all sorts of social issues. But for me, it's also because I consider myself an outsider to these settings, even though I'm Kenyan. I'm not indigenous to, for example, rural Kilifi setting, and I'm not sort of grown up in urban informal settlements. And very often the people who are helping me collect the data might be local to that community and have a much better understanding of how to handle issues. So for me, it's also part of my reflexivity in just kind of talking to them and speaking with them. And, did we handle that okay? Did you think my behavior in that situation was appropriate and okay? Should I have done anything different? So it's also, for me, the debrief comes also from a place of humility in acknowledging that I'm quote unquote a foreigner to those particular settings, even though I am a Kenyan. So yeah, it's also kind of selfish on my part, but then I've always found it to be kind of a very useful part of my data collection, even if it means we take longer to collect data, and we do it well, we try to do it with respect and humility. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Koi. Florencia, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, I was thinking in the different reactions of both teams and how more the Thai team felt more at ease, while the South African not so much. And I was wondering if it has to do with how much help you can bring and how much how much aid you can give to the people there. My guess is that maybe for the South African team, because the main part of the issues had to do with violence, rape, very structural things that you can do very little to help. You have that feeling of impotence and difficulties and the anguish that implies. And coming back to the guidelines, I was thinking that maybe guidelines are not the answer, but in a way they can reflect some of these problems, and then they can help when you are designing a research that will involve all these kind of hardships, like very difficult infrastructural things, or I don't know, domestic violence, rapes, things like that, that you may have some space or even the money to help also your team. And so I think in a way, and I think it was what Wendy also suggested, well, maybe you can justify why this is important also for your team. And because it was really, I think that when you feel that you can help, even if you cannot help with everything, because both situations are quite difficult for migrants, and but there are some situations that may generate more of this moral distress And I think it is important to consider the welfare of the team too, in order to do a good research project. It's not just caring about participants, no, but the whole team.
Thank you, Florencia. I think we'll come back round to this in the next presentation. Sassy will directly engage some of these questions, so we'll continue to talk about what these solutions might look like. There's one thread that we didn't pick up. There are quite a few really important points, but there was one around Arr-Nar and how that intersects with power. And another question, and that was from Caroline, and another from Vicky around voluntariness and how Arr-Nar might raise some questions there. So I just want to put that there. If anyone wants to come back to that in the next discussion section, I didn't want to drop that. Thank you both for those really powerful presentations. We are going to take a 15-minute break, so please get some tea, coffee, beverages of your choice.